A forged masterpiece is not merely a convincing picture. It is a picture that enters the world with a false identity, survives expert attention, and begins changing real decisions around it. We are here to determine the GOAT of 20th century fine art forgery schemes. The field is 20th century fine art forgery schemes. Money moves. Museums rewrite catalogs. Scholars build arguments on an object that never existed in the history they are describing. That separates forgery from copying. A student may reproduce an old master openly. A pastiche may borrow a style without pretending to be old. The decisive act is deception. The false signature, invented history, altered material, or carefully planted story that turns imitation into alleged evidence. Stanton usually rests on three supports. Connoisseurship is the trained judgment of style. Provenance is the documented chain of ownership. Technical examination asks whether canvas, pigment, wood, and aging belong to the claimed period. A formidable forger does not beat one test. He makes the tests appear to agree. The market helps by wanting discoveries. A missing work by a famous artist promises prestige, scholarship, and profit at once. Scarcity makes people cautious in theory, but urgency in practice. The perfect forgery, therefore, supplies something experts already suspect ought to exist, then arrives just before a rival institution can buy it. Our field is 20th century fine art forgery schemes. Sustained deceptions built around paintings or sculpture, not one-off signatures or harmless replicas. The comparison turns on artistic invention, acceptance by serious authorities, duration and reach, cultural damage, and the difficulty of the final exposure. Pure volume is not enough. 1,000 doubtful attributions may be less consequential than one object that redirects a major artist's biography. Nor does price alone settle it. The GOAT must reveal something uncomfortable about how expertise works, when desire, reputation, and evidence all point in the same convenient direction. The strongest candidates did not simply copy what was already known. They manufactured discoveries. One forged medieval objects he had barely seen. Another supplied lost antiquities. A third moved through modern masters like a multilingual actor. And the closest rival invented both paintings and the family collection that supposedly contained them. Acilio Federico Gioni worked in Siena as a painter, gilder, and restorer, surrounded by the techniques of early Italian art. He learned how old wood, tempera, plaster, gilding, and abrasion created the visual grammar of age. His objects did not merely resemble medieval panels. They seemed to have survived medieval lives. His most audacious specialty was the painted cover made for Siena's financial records, known as a Bickerna tablet. Gioni later admitted that he began producing such covers before closely studying genuine examples. He reconstructed a marketable past from fragments, expectations, and craft knowledge, then sold collectors the object they hoped scholarship would confirm. Gioni's achievement was intimate and technically intelligent, but narrow. Once scholars recognized recurring construction habits and decorative formulas, the spell weakened. His forgeries remained fascinating objects, yet they did not destabilize the public identity of a single towering artist or force major institutions into a dramatic reversal. Alceo Docina expanded the game into stone. He could sculpt in the manners of ancient, medieval, and Renaissance Italy with extraordinary fluency. Dealers supplied false histories and sold the works as rediscovered antiquities, while museums and collectors treated fresh marble as material rescued from centuries of obscurity. The scheme carried a useful irony. Docena was not simply an imitator incapable of original work. His technical command was precisely what made the deception possible. He reportedly received only a fraction of the sums generated by dealers. When he learned how much the market had made, the injured craftsman helped expose the fraud. Docena crossed periods and materials more boldly than Gioni, and his works entered serious collections. But the false identities depended heavily on intermediaries. His own sculptures were formidable. The larger fiction around them was supplied by others. That divides the artistic feat from the complete machinery of the hoax. Elmire de Hori brought forgery into the modern art boom. He was said to move among the visual languages of Modigliani, Matisse, Picasso, and other celebrated names, producing works that looked less like copies than plausible additions to an artist's output. Dealers, collectors, and galleries supplied the respectable rooms around them. His reputation eventually became part performance, part legend. Accounts linked him to hundreds, even more than 1,000, suspect works, but the true total is difficult to establish. That uncertainty makes his reach both frightening and hard to score. A giant shadow is not the same thing as a documented body of evidence. Dohori nevertheless changed the cultural image of the forger. Books in Orson Welles' film F for Fake turned authentication itself into the subject. Who decides how certainty is staged, and why an admired image becomes unacceptable the instant its author changes? His limitation is evidentiary. The legend is larger than the verified case. Wolfgang Beltracchi built the strongest rival because he understood that a painting needs paperwork as much as paint. He invented unrecorded works in the styles of modern masters, then connected them to a fictitious family collection, supposedly assembled before the war. Lips, photographs, and remembered ownership made the canvases look inherited rather than manufactured. The deception survived for decades and moved through auction houses, experts, and wealthy buyers. The criminal case ultimately centered on 14 works sold for tens of millions of dollars, while suspicions reached farther. Beltracchi's great innovation was not perfect mimicry. It was building a believable administrative past around paintings no archive had ever recorded. His collapse came from a tiny historical impossibility. A supposed painting from 1914 contained titanium white, a pigment not commercially available in that form at the claimed date. Beltracchi may be the superior long-term market operator, yet his exposure corrected a sprawling fraud. It did not force a nation to decide whether a celebrated cultural treasure had ever existed at all. Han van Meegeren is the GOAT of 20th century fine art forgery schemes. He wins because he did more than place false paintings on the market. He invented a missing chapter in the life of Johannes Vermeer, persuaded leading authorities to defend it, sold one result into the collection of Hermann Göring, and then had to destroy his own masterpiece to save himself. Vermeer was an ideal target. Few paintings were securely known. His biography contained large gaps, and scholars debated how his matured domestic scenes had developed. Van Meegeren did not answer that puzzle by copying a familiar Vermeer. He supplied the religious early period that some experts were already prepared to find. That distinction matters. A direct copy invites comparison with an original. An invented work occupies empty space. Van Meegeren borrowed from 17th century religious painting, especially the gravity of large biblical scenes, then folded those signals into what looked like an unfamiliar stage of Vermeer's development. He also engineered age into the object. Research on his materials shows the use of old canvases and period-looking pigments, combined with modern substances that could harden the paint. Heating and mechanical treatment helped create a surface that seemed old enough to resist ordinary handling, and persuasive enough to survive the examination of its day. The decisive work was The Supper at Emmaus. The eminent connoisseur Abraham Bradius accepted it as a major Vermeer, and Museum Boijmans acquired it in 1937 for a record-level sum. The painting was not merely tolerated, it was celebrated as the kind of discovery that could reorganize the understanding of a master. Once that foundation existed, later pictures entered a world already prepared to receive them. The false early Vermeer had become supporting evidence for more false early Vermeers. This is the dangerous compounding effect of authentication. One accepted object can create the historical context that makes the next object look less surprising. War transformed the scheme from art world scandal into national drama. Through intermediaries, one supposed Vermeer reached Hermann Göring. His appetite for art operated inside a larger system of Nazi seizure and coerced transfer. A forged Dutch treasure had entered the collection of one of the regime's most powerful figures. That setting should not be romanticized. Post-war retellings often cast Van Meegeren as a folk hero who deliberately cheated the Nazis. The documented story is darker and less tidy. He prospered during occupation, dealt with compromised networks, and cultivated the heroic version after the danger arrived. Fooling Göring did not make every earlier choice patriotic. After liberation, investigators traced the Göring painting backward. Van Meegeren was arrested under suspicion connected to collaboration and the transfer of Dutch cultural property. His defense sounded absurd. The national treasure was not a treasure because he had painted it himself. To escape the graver implication, he had to make authorities believe he was a criminal of a different kind. A confession was not enough. Experts who had authenticated the paintings had reputations at stake, and the works themselves appeared to contradict him. Under official supervision, Van Meegeren painted another biblical scene in the supposed Vermeer manner. The performance turned authorship into live evidence. The defendant demonstrated the method that the establishment had declared impossible. Technical investigation then found the modern construction beneath the apparent age. Materials, artificial hardening, and the treatment of the surface supported recent manufacture. The same kind of scientific evidence that later destroyed Beltracchi's chronology now helped to reverse an authentication defended by connoisseurship and institutional prestige. Van Meegeren was convicted of fraud and forgery and received a 1-year sentence. He died before serving it. Public opinion, however, had already begun transforming him. The man accused of surrendering a Vermeer to the enemy became the rogue who had sold Goring a fake, while embarrassed experts became the safest targets in the story. Beltracchi remains the hardest rival. His operation lasted longer, ranged across more artists, and integrated provenance with remarkable discipline. But Van Meegeren's deception penetrated deeper into art history. It created a scholarly phase for Vermeer, entered a major museum as a masterpiece, became entangled with occupation politics, and required a public demonstration to unwind. There are limits to the legend. His paintings no longer look convincingly, Vermeer-like to many modern viewers, and arguments over some attributed forgeries have continued. Hent itself also evolves. A work once condemned as fake can later be restored to the 17th century, which is a useful warning against replacing old certainty with new theatrical certainty. That is why Van Meegeren's GOAT status matters. His scheme showed that expertise can be defeated without making every clue invisible. It is enough to arrange the clues into the story authorities most want to complete. The greatest forgery in this field was therefore not only a painting, it was a consensus that learned to authenticate its own desire.